Every March 17th, millions of people throw on green, watch parades, and maybe drink a little too much Irish spirit. But St. Patrick's Day didn't start with leprechauns, green beer, or even in Ireland. So who was the real St. Patrick? And how did a quiet religious feast turn into a global party? St. Patrick wasn't Irish. He was born in Roman Britain around the late 4th century to a Christian family, but he wasn't very religious as a teenager. At about 16, Irish raiders kidnapped him and sold him as a slave in Ireland, where he spent 6 lonely years herding sheep for a Druid chieftain. In that isolation, he turned to prayer and Christianity and eventually escaped after a dream told him his ship was ready. He walked roughly 200 miles to the coast, found a ship, and made it back home. Back home, Patrick studied in monasteries and became a priest. He couldn't shake a sense that God was calling him back to the very people who had enslaved him. In the early 400s, he returned to Ireland as a missionary, travelling through a land still shaped by pagan druids, clan warfare, and ancient traditions. Over the next 30 years, Patrick preached, founded churches and monasteries, and helped spread Christianity across Ireland. Later, writers credit him with baptizing tens of thousands and founding hundreds of churches, though the exact numbers are debated. Over time, legends grew around Patrick. One story says he drove all the snakes out of Ireland, but scientists point out there's no evidence snakes ever lived there. The snakes probably symbolize his fight against paganism. Another famous story says he used a 3-leaf shamrock to explain the Christian idea of the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. That image didn't appear in art for many centuries, but the shamrock still became a powerful symbol of Irish identity. And originally, Patrick's colour was blue. A shade called St. Patrick's Blue is tied to Irish heraldry. Green came later, woven into Ireland's landscape, its flag, and eventually the politics of Irish identity. Patrick is said to have died on March 17th, around 461 CE, and Irish Christians mark the date as a religious feast day by the early Middle Ages. For centuries in Ireland, it was a quiet, solemn, holy day. Church in the morning, a modest family meal in the afternoon. No green beer. Pubs were often closed by law. The holiday's transformation into a global party has a darker origin. When the Great Famine struck Ireland in the 1840s, over 1 million people died and millions more fled, most of them to America. Irish immigrants had been marching in St. Patrick's Day parades in cities like New York since the mid-1700s. But after the famine, those crowds exploded. The holiday became a way to show pride, push back against anti-Irish discrimination, and hold on to a homeland they had lost. Today, cities around the world, from Dublin to New York to Tokyo, celebrate March 17th with parades, music, and a lot of green. Underneath all the shamrocks and leprechauns, the day still traces back to a kidnapped teenager whose faith and stubborn courage reshaped Ireland's history.